You have reached us on the fifth connection, and a very good morning to you. We are on the 11th day of April, and it is Friday, and it's the end of a work week for most. So we continue right along in this slice of the story as we talk through why believing is so crucial, why it is critical. We are to hold on to the confession of our faith. We need to maintain our confidence in God. Don't throw away your confidence, the writer says. At the end of chapter 10, he says, I am confident of greater things for you because we are not of those who shrink, verse 39, shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who have faith and preserve their souls. Now he embarks on examples of those who held on to their confidence, those who kept on believing amidst great times of crisis, because that's what we need. Examples of those who have gone before are a very encouraging thing to us. We met with somebody who turned 80 recently, and what a joy, an encouragement to our own hearts as we listened to this individual. Because you see, they are ahead of us in the sense that they are a lot further down the road, not just a little, a lot more. And they can speak from experience that it is worth it to maintain your confidence in God. Don't toss it away. And so their faith is a faith worth following. And as you look at the honor roll of faith, the hall of faith, not the hall of flame or the hall of fame, but look at the faith of those who constantly walked with God and trusted Him. We are in verse number 8 of the unfolding story. And we're going to look at a couple of examples now in the patriarchal era, the era of the fathers, the patriarchs. And we're going to look at how endurance triumphed, how faith triumphed in the midst of failure and in the midst of betrayal and in the midst of injustice. Because you see, faith is the continuity of contact with that which you ultimately care about. Let me repeat that. Faith is the continuity of contact with that which you ultimately care about. As I've noticed my own walk with the Lord, how I have changed in my thinking and had to change my thinking. I've also noticed something in my glossary, because I've got a glossary in my file, my digital file on my computer. And as I come across our very familiar words such as faith, hope, love, endurance, confidence, salvation, and all those wonderful words in the biblical text, I have noticed something very interesting over the years, that those definitions have morphed. They have transformed. Yes, they have. They have changed as I have grown, as I have progressed from one degree of glory, as according to 2 Corinthians chapter 3, to the next degree of glory. Those definitions have changed. And one of them has been faith. What is faith? Faith is the continuity of contact with that which you ultimately care about. And so the point behind the paragraph going from verse 8 to verse number 19 is enduring impact comes through personal voluntary sacrifice. That's what this section of the story is going to talk about. Enduring impact only comes through personal voluntary sacrifice, and in that order. And so the probe which supports the point is, what is it about personal voluntary sacrifice, men and women, that inspires endurance? That's the question. behind the paragraph, the original audience became very keenly aware that behind enduring impact is personal voluntary sacrifice. So, what is it about PVS, personal voluntary sacrifice, that inspires and ignites and kindles endurance? Well, we're going to look at a couple of examples here, like we did in the previous episode, from 8 to 19, which is all we would have time for. We're going to look at the example of Abram in his walk with the Lord. The text will continue to talk about Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. But there's a lot to say about Abram. Look at the biblical text. We consider Abram and God's promise. Verse 8 says, by faith, by this continuity of contact with that which Abram ultimately cared about, who was God. By faith, Abram obeyed when he was called to go out to a place that he was to receive as an inheritance. And the text says, and he went, not knowing where he was going. Isn't that beautiful? You go, but you don't know where you're going. In Genesis chapter 12, in the Hebrew text, the rabbis call this section of the annual reading of this part of the text Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha means get up and go. He got up and went. Not that he's get up and go, got up and went and disappeared, but Lech Lecha, he took the challenge. He became a migrant. We are becoming keenly aware of migration of peoples. Europe has experienced massive migrations into their countries from outside of their country. People are swimming across that Mediterranean. They're going across in boats. Some of them are dying to do so and have died in order to do so. Migrations. We suffer from the same affliction in our own country. Migrations of people from Southern Africa across our huge border in the north to come into this country and to come to a better life. Abram demonstrated faith in God's promise by obeying God's call and migrating to the land of promise. It says in verse 9, by faith he went to live in the land of promise. Listen to this. As in a foreign land, living as a nomad, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, heirs with him of the same promise. I just think of that. Lech lecha, get up and go, and you're going to continue your existence outside of your land, the land of your birth, as a nomad. You're going to be living in a tent. Imagine in the city, you leave your apartment and you opt for an amakuku and you go to live in a tent. What kind of life is that? But you see, this man had the eyes of faith. He had continuity of contact with the God who made a promise. Get up and go, and I will show you a land. But it had its personal, voluntary sacrifice. It carried personal, voluntary sacrifice. I remember many years ago when we uprooted with our family, my wife and I and 2 kids, uprooted from the familiar, journeyed across to a distant shore, to what often is considered the land of the free, the land of promise. I went to study there and get some skills, just a few. And of course, migrated back to where we came from. Well, Abram didn't migrate back, right? The text goes on to say, verse 10, For he was looking forward to the city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. Now, watch how the writer is utilizing the Old Testament picture. And we get our knickers in a knot here interpretively because we want the writer, we want to preserve the original meaning of the ancient text. But we don't realize that what the writer is doing is using the example of Abram and now showing how that Abram's gaze went beyond the land to a city that has foundations, whose designer and builder is God. His eyes went beyond that piece of real estate in the Middle East. Because verse 11 goes on to say, by faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive. There was migration, there was conception of a child, even when she was past the age of childbearing, a miracle child. Since she considered God, that is Him, the antecedent of Him, as God. She considered Him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, his body was klaar. He was finished. And from that dead body, as it were, God raises up a descendant. From that one man were born descendants as many as the stars of heaven, and as many and as innumerable grains of sand by the seashore. Migration, conception. And now in verse 13, suspension of the fulfillment of the promise. Now it goes, soos hulle sê in Afrikaans, eers gaan dit goed, dan gaan dit sleg, en dan gaan dit al hoe slegter. It goes from good to bad to worse. Verse 13 says, these all died. Oh, now what kind of promise is this? What kind of God is this? Who will exchange heaven's throne for a cross. God did it. And that's what He will call for followers of the way to do. Exchange splendor and achievement for the cross. These all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, and having acknowledged that they were strangers and exile on the earth. For people who speak thus, make it clear that they are seeking a homeland, but they are seeking a home away from home. If you've traveled, if you've lived away from your home country, you know what that is about. You make a home away from home. Carries great challenges, but great excitement. Because life is an adventure. And enjoy the ride, men and women. Verse 15. If they had been thinking of that land from which they had gone out, that they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country. They're going for something better. We as a family left here for something very different than what we were used to. Now we came back. But these saints didn't come back to their home turf because they desired a better country. What kind of country? A heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, as He has prepared for them a city, a home away from home. So from migration to conception to suspension of the promise. Oh, it becomes really challenging when God puts His plan, as it were, for our lives on hold, and we think that He has forsaken us. He has deserted us. And then on top of that, in verse 17, it doesn't end there. There's suspension of the promise. Then there is a call for the termination of that promise. What does this termination look like? Remember, we are talking about personal voluntary sacrifice, and in that order, it's personal, deeply personal, deeply voluntary. We are not coerced into it. And it calls for sacrifice, putting something on the altar that will cost us all we are and have. Verse 17, by faith, by that continuity of contact with God, what happened? When Abram was tested, he offered up Isaac, and he who had received the promise was in the act of offering up his son, of whom it was said, and I quote, through Isaac shall your offspring be named. He considered that God was able to raise him, that's Isaac, from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. Let's just stop there. Let's just camp there. Migration, conception to suspension. You are going to get not just knocked down, you're going to get knocked out often across your lifetime. You're going to take a biff. It's an onomatopoeic word for getting struck. If you were given to reading British comics the way we did as kids, then whenever there was a fight in these comic books, you'd have this onomatopoeic word such as biff and pow and bang and crash. Biff, B-I-F-F, but I want to drop the one F. Biff, betrayal, injustice, and failure. Oh, what Abram experiences is great challenges along the way. This challenge comes up, and the challenge is in the area of conception. Sarah's past childbearing. He opts for culture coding, and he impregnates Hagar, and she has a child, and he thinks that that was the way God was going to do it. Didn't go that way. And you watch over a period of 25 years how his faith gets challenged over a 25-year window, because it seems as if the heavens have turned to bronze and God has suspended his promise. Well, in a sense, he did. But Abram kept on holding on. He considered that God was able to raise Isaac. Let's land this plane. What impact does human migration, conception, the birth of a child, suspension of citizenship, and termination, the sacrifice of a son, that which is most prized by you, your offspring? What do these things have? What impact do they have on the human psyche? Just think about that for a moment. The group areas impacted many of us and our parents as we were moved out of areas that were now governmentally decided that we could not live there any longer because of our skin pigment. We had to migrate to different regions in the country. Migration. Many committed suicide over those years. They couldn't take it in South Africa. The birth of a child. So that should changes your life and your direction. Suspension of your citizenship. And then God taking away the delight of your eyes, challenging you to give up what you prize most highly, your offspring. Just think about the consternation that brings into your world. Because there's something about personal, voluntary sacrifice that carries transcendence. when God sent his son to die on a cross, it's where heaven and earth collided. That's why Calvary is the watershed in the West. Specifically, it's the watershed of history, because Western culture has been grounded upon Christian values and biblical norms. And we see the whittling away of that. Some are saying it's already collapsed. Others are saying in the process of collapse. What impact does human migration, conception, and suspension of citizenship and the termination of our offspring have on our, what impact does it have on our psyche? What's God calling you on you this morning to do? That is calling on you to make an ultimate sacrifice that you've been running away from. Change of a job, returning back to when you first believed. You've lost the traces. You've grown cold in your walk with the Lord. Now you are in your old age. It's calling on you to revitalize and retread. Put on some more rubber on that tire, because it ain't over till he says it is over. And while some of us are reaching for the bench, there are others of us who are together with Caleb saying, listen, Josh, give me the hills of the Anakim. I want to take the giant country, the hill country where the Anakim exists, the giant clans are. Think about the challenge that God is calling you to. And watch how the faith of these ancient peoples is a faith worth emulating and following. Because faith will require a long-windedness, a stick-to-itiveness, soos hulle sê in Afrikaans, wat skrik vir niks. Are you on the verge of bailing out because it's too hot? Like we say, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. But that's exactly the point. Some of the most exciting things happen in a kitchen when the heat is on. What's God calling you to? What's the next faith challenge for you? I trust that you will enjoy the day as you go with God. Goodbye for now.